darkness of night. You are out in the wilderness. It is pitch black. You can't see anything except the outlines of tree roots and the rocks under your feet. It is cold. The wind is biting the back of your neck, sending shivers up your spine. Your heart is pounding. Off in the distance, you see a flickering light. Furious, you approach the light. And as you move closer, you notice that a house appears to be ablaze. Should you move closer and risk being burned? Or return from where you came? You move closer, risking a burn. Now you notice that the house also appears to be emanating a bright, beautiful light. Is the house actually on fire? You are overwhelmed with terror and fascination, joy and dread, exhilaration and anxiety. Confused, you cry out, "Is it possible that there is no owner of this house?" Out of one of the windows, a man pokes his head. "I am the owner of this house." Genesis Rabbah explains that this parable puts Abraham in your shoes. Abraham calls out, "Is it possible that there is no master of the universe?" To which God replies, "I am the master of the universe." And then tells Abraham, Lecha. In this midrash, the house and the world are described as Lecha. This word is ambiguous. It can mean ablaze or illuminated. The root of Lecha can also be found in our blessings over the Shabbat candles. Lahadlik ner shel Shabbat. The question is, according to this midrash, is our world radiating beautiful light, or is it engulfed in destructive flame? According to Rabbi Ronaldo Maxwell's read of the midrash, the answer is in fact both. The world is both illuminated and ablaze at the same time. Last Sunday, I asked my 6th and 7th graders to reflect on the ambiguous nature of this word, Lecha. One student posited that God created the world, so it's illuminated. But there's evil in the world, so it's also burning. Another thought, forest fires destroy so that new life can form. You need destruction to make room for creation. Another added, creation is not always good. We create all of this new technology in the world, and we don't realize how it's polluting and destroying our environment. Creation, in fact, blinds us. It makes us selfish. Finally, another said, it's like the Garden of Eden. Adam and Eve ate from the tree of good and evil. They are one and the same. You can't have one without the other. You can imagine how wide the smile was on my face to see these middle schoolers understanding the tension in the word Lecha. Our world is on fire. And as my students pointed out, fire can be both constructive and destructive. For example, forest fires destroy, but they also bring new life. When an old tree is consumed by fire, the ashes serve as fertilizer for sapling. The sky is now open so that the sun and rain can nourish the sapling's growth. In the natural world, fire brings death, but also cultivates life. In our own lives, often when something ends, it creates space for something new to flourish. So the fire itself is both destructive and constructive. Hearing the call Lecha, as Abraham does, means to see the fire as both constructive and destructive at the same time. And this is a daunting task, because as Rabbi Brad Bardson points out, conventional theology teaches us to think in monopolar terms. Everything is either one pole or the other. For example, if something is simple, it cannot also be complex. If something is eternal, it cannot also be dynamic. If something is constructive, it cannot also be destructive. At the turn of the 20th century, a philosopher named Morris Raphael Cohen came up with the notion of dipolarity. Dipolarity states that something can have one trait in one context and another trait in another context. For example, my dad is both father and son at the same time. It's only logically incompatible if he claims to be both to the same person. He is father to me and son to my grandfather. This idea is also present in our Jewish tradition. In Midrash Tamora, it is written, God created everything in pairs, one set against the other. In fact, we can only truly understand the universe and all its complexity if we can understand it entirely. To respond to the call Lecha means that even if the rest of the world sees the fire as monopolar, we, as leaders, must see it as dipolar. We cannot be so enamored by the fire's illumination that we are blind to its destructive nature. Nor can we always shy away from the fire's destructive nature, knowing that it may lead to new creation. Seeing the world as dipolar is controversial, and telling people so is a risk. It might mean telling people that a belief they hold as constructive is also destructive. For example, Martin Luther King Jr. challenged what he saw as a destructive status quo. He lived in a society which saw segregation as constructive and equal rights as destructive. He saw what needed to be done and pushed the bounds of what was normative. This is what great leaders do. They see which way the arc of history bends. King saw the necessity to change our country's perspective on race. Dr. King responded to the call Lecha. As leaders, we are called not just to hear Lecha, we are called to respond to Lecha. It is not good enough to recognize the world as dipolar. We are called to go out and articulate to the world that another perspective might more brightly illuminate our world. Embodying the call Lecha is to be an iconoclast, like King, Galileo, Emma Goldman, Darwin, and Abraham. Avram responds to the call Lecha and sets out with his wife Sarai. They reach the land of Canaan and find it overcome with famine. Seeing the dangers of staying put, they descend to Egypt to find food. When they get close to Egypt, Avram begins to fear that Sarai's beauty might be a danger to his life. He pleads with Sarai, Hinena, yadati ki isha yafat mar'eat. Please now I realize the consequences of your beauty. This is the first of 9 times the phrase Hinena appears in the Torah, all in the book of Genesis. Dr. Sperling teaches that the word Hine introduces something to the character or the audience or both. In this instance, we have Hine followed by the emphatic na, meaning please. Avram doesn't say Hine ni, which is about being individually present. He says Hine na, which is a request for others to see something new, to change their perspective. Hine is Avram's realization that Sarai's beauty is dipolar. It is both beautiful and a danger to his life. Saying, na, in this instance, is Avram's plea to Sarai to understand that very danger. Saying Hine na is to see the dipolarity of the situation, and then plead to another, begging them to understand that another perspective exists. The Hine is not the risk. The na is the risk. It is a risk because Sarai might not accept his perspective. She might refuse his plea to play sister, and if she does, the Egyptians might kill Avram and take her. Avram is asking Sarai to risk to see the dipolarity of her own beauty, to place herself in physical danger. She accepts. Luckily for them, the risk pays off. God rescues Avram and Sarai from Pharaoh's clutches, and they amass a large sum of wealth along the way. What allows Avram to risk saying Hinena to Sarai? According to Midrash Haggadah, Avram has some information that Sarai's beauty poses a danger, would be a danger to him in Egypt. This knowledge allowed Avram to see her beauty as dipolar and causes him to fear for his life, which leads him to say not, pleading with Sarai to see his perspective and put herself at risk to protect him. They are able to take the risk because they know they have God's blessing and support. Now, such a calculated risk does not always pay off. Later in the Parashat, we encounter the second use of Hinena in the Torah. Sarai says to Avram, Hinena, atzarani Adonai yuledet. Please now, God has prevented me from bearing children. Please go to my handmaid. Perhaps I can have a son through her. Like Avram's Hinena, Sarai's is based on information. She knows that they need children in order for their lineage to survive. So she takes a calculated risk and pleads with Avram to understand her realization. She proposes that Avram go to Hagar to ensure the survival of their lineage. She must have felt so vulnerable, pleading with Avram to understand that she would not be the mother of his children. Unlike the earlier risk in Egypt, this risk seems to fail. After Hagar gives birth to Avram's son Ishmael, Sarai is distraught. She forces Avram to kick Hagar and Ishmael out of the house. The risk results in tremendous emotional damage for all parties involved. It is always a risk to try and see the dipolarity of the world, because it means trying to see the totality of it. It means trying to understand the complexities and contradictions in this world. Of course, to see it all is an impossible task. Avram and Sarai try to see everything clearly before they take a risk. But as is the nature of all risk-taking, you never know what the outcome will be. Avram doesn't know that Sarai will be taken by Pharaoh, and Sarai doesn't know that she will be emotionally distraught. To respond to Lecha means to understand that the world is Lecha, to take calculated risks informed by tradition, history, and culture, to help others understand it in perspective, all the while not knowing for sure what the result will be. The survival of Judaism has always depended on its leaders' ability to respond to Lecha. Yochanan ben Zakkai took a risk when he said Hinena, pleading with his community. If we continue this fight, we will be destroyed. Smuggle me out of Jerusalem so I can make a deal with the soon-to-be emperor. Perhaps then the destruction of Jerusalem will make way for the construction of Yavne. To some, his actions were traitorous. They refused to see the dipolarity of the situation. Rabbi Regina Yonis said, Hinena, it's time for women to be rabbis. She was turned down by none other than Leo Beck. He said the time was not right amidst the fear of anti-Semitism in Germany in the late 1930s. Rabbi Yonis saw the destructive power of what society deemed a constructive, purely male rabbinate. She did not stop pleading until the rabbi did listen, paving the way for the world to change its perspective and view an egalitarian rabbinate as constructive. Judaism has never been static. There have always been risk-takers, those who see the world as Lecha. Now it becomes our turn to say Hinena. How are we being trained to see the dipolar nature of our world? How are we cultivating both the strength and vulnerability needed to stand up in front of our communities and point out that the world is Lecha? Here at HUCJIR, we learn all about tradition and history and contemporary culture. We acquire the information necessary to see the dipolar nature of our world. We gaze at the fire through the eyes of iconoclasts, such as Rambam, Kant, Zornberg, Buber, Leibowitz, and Borowitz. We gain the insight of the dipolar nature of Torah and Talmud and Midrash, of Nusach, ritual, and liturgy. We also need the opportunity to practice cultivating the capacity to say Hinena and take calculated risks. And what better place than right here within these supportive walls at HUC? But I have a sense that there is some anxiety around risk-taking. I feel it. The anxiety to perform at a high level is dipolar, both constructive and destructive. It's constructive because it means we care about what we are doing, and our teachers and mentors have high expectations for us. I would be more concerned if we were not nervous when we stand in front of any kahal. But it is also destructive when the anxiety to be perfect prevents us from taking risks. And this anxiety is not unique to HUC. It permeates our American culture. Our culture trains us to expect punishment when we fail, so we don't take risks. We cannot let these fears prevent us from taking risks within these supportive walls. We need our own captain of moonshots. At Google, they have a guy whose job is to promote risk-taking. His title is Captain of Moonshots because they want all of their employees to shoot for the moon. We too should be supported and pushed to shoot for the moon. For Captain Moonshot, when his employees fail, he cheers and meets them with hugs instead of chastisement. Afterwards, they reflect on what they learned from the experience. He sees the dipolar nature of risk-taking and says Hinena to his employees. He says to them, look, I know society focuses on the destructive aspect of risk-taking. Now, please, I want you to focus on the constructive aspect of risk-taking. This culture at Google fights against cultural norms and promotes employees' ability to take calculated risks, saying Hinena in order to change the way the world views technology. Now, keeping up with Google is a high bar. Saying that, in just the last 5 years, we have taken tremendous strides here. We have programs like Be Wise, which encourage us to take risks and say, Hinena, I see some niche that needs to be filled. And programs like Spiritual Direction, which help us learn about the dipolar nature of ourselves, of our experience of life, and of the world itself. Even with these strong programs and others, to successfully address the magnitude of the challenges we face as a community and a country, we need to be PhDs in Hinena. How are we encouraging students to take risks and say Hinena in tefillah, in practicums, in recitals, in senior sermons, in the classroom? Today, Jason and Jay are taking a risk and saying Hinena, God language should not be limited to the masculine. And Hinena, another order of the Torah service, might allow us to connect with it differently. I'm excited to see students recognizing this need and challenging themselves. Maybe it worked for you, maybe it didn't. But they should be applauded for taking the risk. God says to Abram, Al Tirah, Anochim Agenma. Don't fear, for I am your shield. Each of us stands like Abram, staring at a world of Lech, staring at a world ablaze and a world full of potential. May each of us in this room feel the support that God offers to Abram, so that we feel comfortable responding to the call Lecha, so that we can risk saying Hinena, so that when we leave these walls, we can plead with the world that another perspective might illuminate a better tomorrow. Can you hear us up? This is